Oi gente, esse vídeo que vocês vão assistir agora é uma entrevista com o autor francês Benoît Peeters, que é coautor da série Cidades Obscuras e um dos maiores pesquisadores de quadrinhos do mundo. Esse vídeo foi gravado em Ouro Preto no dia 16 de agosto, na Livraria Outras Palavras, então fica nosso super agradecimento à livraria por ter cedido esse espaço e à editora QS Comics por ter feito a ponte com o autor. Aproveite o vídeo.
This is not your first time here in Brazil, so there's any fond memories you had here, any special memories you can share with us?
Yes, I was in 1997 with my friend François Schuiten. As we say in Belgium, in France it's pronounced differently, it's a difficult name, and he's my friend since our childhood, and we visited the festival of Belo Horizonte, and with a nice exhibition. I think the name of the title of the exhibition was From Comics to Multimedia. So in 1997 it was a little different, but we already had a website, a creative website. We even got an award for this because it was something really new. Of course, now it's totally old-fashioned, old styles. The technology has changed a lot, but we still are very present on internet with a website called altaplana.be, and it's a Dutch friend who is managing the whole thing with contribution from all over the world. So it's very incredible because we give some material, but a lot of material coming from readers from many countries in different languages.
So nice. And compared from, when you first came in 1997 in Belo Horizonte, our comics market here in Brazil would still grow a lot. Basically in volume, of course, a volume of comics published, but also in diversity. Do you believe that this growth in comics around the world, I can say, it's a kind of phenomenon since then, since the 90s, around the world that happened?
Yes, I think in many countries things are in a huge evolution, maybe through the idea of graphic novel. We can criticize this word, but it helped a lot. It helped to be in some bookshops, libraries, in serious newspaper, sometimes on television, also the international festivals, and a lot of exchanges between countries. For a long period, every important country had its own tradition and knew only a little about the other traditions. And now it's more involved. This is very positive. I don't know how really the market and the creativity works here in Brazil, but I hope to discover it in the next few days, especially in Jornadas of São Paulo, where I will meet other people.
Yeah, and you've said you and François Schuiten. I don't know if I spoke right, but you said you were childhood friends. Yeah, you were classmates, right?
Yes. We met when we were 12, and we were in the same school from 12 to 14, and creating a small newspaper in the school, and practicing painting under the direction of his father, who was architect but also a painter. We were only two in the studio on Sunday morning and sometimes visiting some exhibitions on Saturday afternoon. But I must say that he was better than me for drawing and painting. And so I'm still very, very interested in images. And this short experience was very important for me, but I think I'm better as a writer. I must say.
And that friendship developed into long-lasting partnership in comics, right?
Yes.
How did that happen?
Yes, we were very close and had the same tastes when we were kids. But then during the adolescence, I went to Paris and studied literature and philosophy. François was in Brussels, studied comics in a specific school. And so we had not so many contacts, but I went back in Brussels at 21 or 22 for sentimental reasons, and we met again, and directly our complicity was there. And so François Schuiten had published some stories in heavy metal, Métal Hurlant, and I loved his first stories, and I had published, when I was a student, 2 short novels, and he read them. And the second one was in an imaginary city. And so we can say that there is a mixture between his first stories in Métal Hurlant with his brother and one of his friends, and the atmosphere of my second novel. We was a sort of detective novel, mixed, let's say, between Borges and Agatha Christie, a labyrinthic fiction. So we tried to create a book together for a magazine which was very important for us, very attractive. It was called À Suivre, to be followed. And in this magazine, monthly magazine, there was authors like Hugo Pratt, Jacques Tardy, and many others, prestigious authors. We were both the debutants, the young artists, but our work was appreciated since the first volume, Les Murailles de Samaris, the Great Walls of Samaris. It was about 2 imaginary cities. We didn't decide to create many books, but the first one was successful, and we were happy with our collaboration and tried to make a second book. The second book was in black and white. The first one was in color, but it belonged to the same universe. And we called this universe Les Cités Obscures, the obscure cities. But obscure has a lot of meanings in French. I don't know how it works in Portuguese, but there is this idea of mystery, something secret, something different from our world. And each book is independent, but when you read some of them in any order, you will discover some connections. So this is one of the specificity. The other specificity is that the decor, the background, the architecture, the urbanistic dimension is very, very important. As I said, the father of François Schuiten was a renowned architect in Belgium, and so we were both, let's say, children of the cities, the big cities. I knew Paris, François knew specifically Brussels, but also some Italian towns and so. And we were more and more interested in this theme, specifically for the 3, 4, 5 first books of the series, and then the characters became more important. In stories like L'Enfant Penché or L'Ombre d'un Homme, some others, the characters are more important. You can see it directly in the titles. The first books are directly connected to a place, like La Tour, and the later books are more connected about what kind. But of course, architecture and space is still very important. François Schuiten is a very precise artist working with a lot of details, and he doesn't like to draw the actual world, the normal cars or computers or smartphones. He prefers to draw specific objects. So we invent something with architecture, costumes, haircut, and anything to make it, let's say, not really futuristic, not really related to the past, but the world as it could have developed if, at the period of Jules Verne, the technology and the ideology had taken other direction. And Jules Verne is very present in our worlds, specifically in the last one, Le Retour du Capitaine Nemo, the return of Captain Nemo being, of course, a very, very famous character of Jules Verne. And he was supposed dead, but we gave him a third life, a new life.
And speaking of that, it's such a pity that it's still unpublished here in Brazil. As Cidades Obscuras was not published here yet, but you will make your debut here with Revoir Paris, yeah,
Yes.
with Kiesi Comics. And what are you expecting from the reception of Brazilian readers?
I must first say that many of our books were published in Portugal during many years, and then unfortunately the publishing house disappeared.
And Brazilians imported them.
Yes,
to read
exactly.
here.
So I've signed in Rio de Janeiro some copies of the old books by Edições 70 or BÉLGICA, and I remember I told it to my companion Valerie that there was an imaginary congress in Coimbra about the obscure cities, as cidades visíveis. I don't say it perfectly, but cidades visíveis. And it was very funny because two fans of the series, they invented the whole Congress and wrote every communication about philosophical reading, political reading, psychoanalytical reading, the question of women, different style. But they wrote everything as if it happened. So this is to say that if we are not well known in Brazil, we were at a certain moment well known in Portugal. But for the publisher, the difficulty was that many readers, many fans, they bought the French book because it was published before, and they preferred to have the original version. And then, of course, it was difficult, and the market in Portugal was small. Now we will have one book in Brazil in a few weeks or months, and we are very, very happy for it. But it's not one volume of the obscure cities. It's independent. The story Revoir Paris, which happens in our world, but in the future, in 2156 it begins. And it's just 2 centuries after our birth at Francois and me. We were born in 1956. Maybe I shouldn't say it. So we imagined Paris in a very, very specific situation. And okay, this is a sort of science fiction story which is different from the obscure cities, which are more in the fantastic register. But maybe the publisher liked the idea to have this totally independent book, which is not connected to the other. Of course, our hope is that some readers will want to discover some other books. But I understand perfectly that we are very lucky in the French market with a large audience, and our book have something like 100 pages, 120 pages, 130 pages, and many of them are in color, so it's expensive to produce because we want nice objects. And okay, so thanks to Telmo Diniz to take the risk to publish this first book, and we hope that it will be successful. It would have been a great pleasure to be there with the book, but let's say I'm preparing the publication, and also there is a small free publication you have indicated it nicely on your website. So this is a book about comics, 2 conferences with a lot of illustration, and it will be printed, but it's also freely accessible, and this is nice, so people can discover not only the fiction that I wrote, but some reflections about history of comics, future of comics, and the specificity of this language, which is very important for me. People think sometimes that comics are just a poor genre. It's not as serious as painting or as novels or even as cinema. But you have a lot of freedom with comics, and you can create some incredible things just being alone, or 2 or 3 people creating a book. And so we have a real freedom, because we don't need to have a mass market. We just need to have some readers, and you can also find the books in the libraries. So I think there is a lot of future in comics, and for young people with political subjects, with autobiographical matters, with inquiries, journalistic world, or imaginary work. There are so many possibilities. Let's remember Mouse by Art Spiegelman, Persepolis by Marjan Satrapi, or one of your authors, I will not pronounce the name right, but Marcello Quintanilla, who was awarded in Angoulême with his wonderful book, Écoute Jolie Marcia. You know the title, because it was published in many countries. And so this was a great success. And of course, Ricardo Leite with his beautiful book about Tintin and the search of Tintin and the passion for comics. But I'm sure that there are many others. I met in Rio a young woman, very creative, and we hope that she will develop her work. So I'm sure there is a lot of artistic future. Economically, I'm not able to say if it can develop as a whole market. But here we are in a beautiful bookshop, so let's hope that comics will find a lot of places to be seen.
And here in Brazil, comics are still very much associated with childhood, with kids, and there's almost a sense that when people grow up, when they're adults, comics are no longer part of their lives. But it seems for us that in French people, that Belgian, this is different. Comics is more part of adulthood there. That's what it seems for us. Do you think there's something that explains that? It's comics more part of French culture, or more part of Belgian culture than it's our here in Brazil, maybe?
So when I was a kid in Brussels, comics were mostly for kids, but they were very, very present. Since the beginning of the 30s, there was Tintin by Hergé, and his success attracted a lot of authors in the 40s, 50s, 60s. So comics were very, very present. In France, with Asterix by Uderzo and Goscinny, comics were incredibly successful, and kids and then teenagers read them with pleasure. We did not have so much the tradition of superheroes. We had our own production with magazines like Spirou, Tintin, Pilote. And then when people those readers were adults, young adults, they wanted new themes or new style. And this was the period where we began to work with authors like Tardy, Möbius, Drouillet, Gottlieb, Claire Bretéché, one of the first women in the world of comics. And so there was a sort of adult interest for comics, and it helped to create a real world, so many great talents in different styles, and so even serious people thought that comics were not reserved for kids. And that's why work like the Obscure Cities could find an audience at that time. Many of our readers were readers of Hergé, of Asterix, of Black Mortimer, Spirou, Smurfs, and so when they were kids. But now they wanted something different, and they like the language. So in some countries, like in the United States or Japan, maybe in Argentina also, there is a huge tradition, a huge attraction. In other countries, like Germany, it's very different. And so adult comics found with difficulties their way, because there were some prejudice against comics. I remember creating a series of documentaries for the French-German channel Arte, and in France it was really appreciated. But I remember that the director of Arte in Germany said, "Oh, you look like an intelligent person. I don't know why you are losing your time with comics and Kultur. Das ist Musik und Philosophie." You can easily understand. And so I tried to say something. And the only book that he liked and appreciated was Maus by Art Spiegelman. Very serious subject, and for German people, they are very concerned. And I accepted when I said, you should read Persepolis. Okay, Persepolis was okay, because it was serious condition of women, exile, Iran, and so. But for other type of comics, he thought that it was just losing your time. So he was an old man, and I'm sure that a lot of younger journalists and people in Germany now they enjoy it, but they never had the same traditions than France and Belgium or Japan. You know, in Japan everybody is reading mangas, and you have so different varieties of mangas. You have them for all audience, and of course also for kids.
Actually, everywhere in the world, people is reading manga.
Yes, yes,
in France,
yes,
here in
yes,
Brazil,
yes.
it's a growing market. Yeah.
Yes, yes. With some difficulties now in Japan, but it's still very, very important. It was a press phenomenon, so there were a lot of magazines, very cheap, and everybody was able to find them, to look at them, and now the evolution is more in the book form. And when you say book form, you have to choose an author, not another, and it's more expensive, it's more artistic, let's say. And it was also good to know that many comics were printed in the press for generation, like Mafalda or Peanuts, or many things were there in the normal life. So you read your newspaper and you discover it, or you like to find again those characters. When you have to choose a book, it's not for everybody.
I'd like to know a bit about how your interest in academic research on comics started.
When I was a student, I studied philosophy, but I was, as I told you, writing 2 short novels, so I was not such a serious student. And I didn't want to make a classic thesis in philosophy. And I had a great professor who was Roland Barthes, an important writer, and I said to him, I would like to make my diploma about Tintin, about one book, Les Bijoux de la Castafiore, the jewels of Bianca Castafiore, which is a late book, very specific, with a sort of intern parody of Tintin. And Roland Barthes had studied very carefully, line after line, one short story of Balzac. And I took this as a model and tried to do the same type of approach, but of course it's totally different because the object is totally different, about this book. So I took a book by the first image and followed it till the last image, but there were a lot of other analyses about the other Tintin books or other works which were connected to it. So this was my first, let's say, academic work about comics. And at that time, there were only a few publications about comics and specifically Tintin. Now we have hundreds of books. But at that time, it was really the beginning. I was lucky enough to meet Hergé, to do some interviews with him. And then I entered in this work, and then I try to discover more and more type of comics, different traditions, knowing the beginning of comics. And I wrote about comics when I wrote for comics. So both activities were important for me, and I can say that now I had a rather good knowledge of the art and history of comics, but when I was a young man, I only knew one specific Belgian and French tradition. I had to discover American comics, to discover great authors like Brescia, to discover some mangakas, and now I am friends with many authors and many contemporary authors like Chris Ware. I wrote about him, but also Jiro Taniguchi, a great mangaka. I know Otomo, the creator of Akira, and so I've enlarged my vision of comics. And it's a pleasure because you learn things and then you try to share them. So I gave a lot of conferences and published some books about it. And so this little book that is now published about a nova arte, Historias and Quadrinhos, is a synthesis of my research about many comics, and specifically the art of comics. I don't know every comic. There are so many, but I try to discover the specific possibilities of this way of narration. This is very important. And when you read my writings, you can say, oh, maybe he could have spoken about this or that, but maybe you can use the tools that I gave or criticize them, which is also a very good thing, because theory, reflection is not to give rules, but to give the idea of many possibilities. And when you criticize my work, I'm happy. If you do it, of course, carefully and seriously. But it's a good thing. Like in scientific research, we have to criticize, to progress, or to say, oh, yes, but there is another very interesting example or counter-example. And this is important. And now I can say that academic research or journalistic research or the historical research about comics are in a great development.
Awesome. As a follow-up from the subject, which contemporary authors do you consider, essential for understanding today's comic scene. So around the world, you can pick as much as you want and maybe give a panorama.
Yeah, my favorite author is Chris Ware. I think he's as important as Winsor McCay, what creator of Little Nemo was at the beginning of the 20th century. But even in the United States, you have so many important creators like Art Spiegelman, Emil Ferris, Craig Thompson, Tomine, and so many. In Europe, where I cannot say the names because they have dozens of talents, specifically women artists, which is rather new since 25 years. At the beginning, there were almost only male artists and 2-3 exceptions, like Bretéché, but now you have a real creativity. As I said, mangas are very diverse in Japan, more than we sometimes see through the translations. There is an incredible creativity. All themes, all graphic styles can be treated into comics, even with non-fiction books, biographies, autobiographical. I will, in Brasilia, give a talk which is called New Territories of Comics and Graphic Novel, and I will show a lot of images, and probably people, even well-informed, will be surprised and say, oh yes, there is this and that and that. And even when I speak to very traditional audiences with old people, and so some people say, oh, I'd never imagined that it was so rich and sometimes so beautiful. You know, maybe the Italian artist Lorenzo Mattotti, for example. This is so beautiful. People loving art and painting, they like it. Another like Emmanuel Guibert. He's very literary, very fascinating. Woman artist, Catherine Meurice. She entered in the Academy of Fine Arts in France as Guibert. She wrote really moving stories. But this is only a few examples because the creativity is there. The economical condition of comics, even in France, in Belgium, is more difficult than you can imagine. The market is important and high through Asterix, Lucky Luke, and some others. But we have now so many authors and so many young authors that their professional life is very difficult.
There are a lot of small presses there too, right?
Yes. But I worked with some friends, comics artists, about an inquiry about the situation of authors, and we have many art schools. They are forming talented people, but then sometimes they are very disappointed because they cannot make a living with it. So when you look at the French market from Brazil or from Indonesia or I don't know, to say, oh yes, this is great, Angoulême, and so, but when you see it very closely and carefully, you see that it's not, the golden years maybe are behind us. And I said a few days ago in Rio that the success that we had with Schuiten for the obscure cities, maybe it wouldn't be possible now, because we had magazines, and magazines helped to make our work popular and helped us to make a living with it. And now there are only the books, and it's prestigious artistically, but it's economically difficult.
It's the last one. You were in Tiradentes. We are speaking now in Ouro Preto. These two cities were not part of your schedule, official schedule here in Brazil. And I can't help but ask, visiting those cities, visiting Minas Gerais again, is somehow a way of feeding your creativity?
Yes, of course. I must admit that I love to travel, and I travel a lot through the world, and I had a very good memory about Rio or about Ouro Preto, but I had at that time not much time to discover the cities. So this time we decided to take more time. And of course, I have also a specific love for or interest for Brasilia, because Brasilia is very close to the themes of our books. And we visited also in Niterói the Niemeyer foundation and the museum that he created, and it will be a pleasure to rediscover Brasilia, even if Brasilia is a strange utopia, but it's unique, it's totally unique, and so it's a source of fascination. In our story, La Fièvre d'Urbicán, the second book, which was very successful in France in the 80s and helped us to develop the obscure. The city of Urbicán is very influenced by Le Corbusier, but also by Lucio Costa and Niemeyer and so. And we even created a very short story I could send you the pages. It was published in the last issue of À Suivre, and it was the character of La Fièvre d'Urbicán, a very old man, the urbatect. He's dreaming that the whole story is beginning again, and he's in Brasilia. So his last hours were in Brasilia. It's just a story with 3 pages, not very well known, but it shows how important it was. And of course, we enjoyed Rio de Janeiro, as everybody, especially French people. We had so many French people speaking in the streets of Rio, and we have to discover many, many other places. We would have liked to be in Petropolis or many others, but it will be for another time.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
this interview, for taking a bit of time for us.
With a pleasure.